Hey guys, so we are now in the seventh part of the Ottoman Empire Mehmed II series. If you want to watch the original video from Kings and Generals, the link is down in the description down below. And if you want to help me out in any way, shape, or form, feel free to please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helped me out a lot, and I'd appreciate it very much. Thank you. Now, with that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we?
Since the Ottoman conquest of Serbia and Bosnia, the Turkish martial lords of the Balkans gradually intensified their raids deep into Europe. In 1474, Mihalolu Ali Bey had launched a significant raid into Hungary. He reached as far as Oradea, enslaving and looting as he progressed through the country. Later that year, Turkish raiders from Bosnia also invaded Croatia, extending as far as Varaždin, Metlika and Batui. By the time of the disaster at Vaslui, Ottoman raiders had penetrated into the border regions of Carniola and Carinthia, causing significant panic in the royal courts of both Hungary and Austria. Due to these devastating incursions into his realm, Matthias Corvinus pledged support for Stephen's war effort against Mehmed. Pausing his campaign in Bohemia, the Hungarian king gathered an army of 10,000 and marched on the recently constructed Ottoman fortress of Shabatz in the fall of 1475. By the start of the new year, the fortress was besieged, with the assistance of the titular despot of Serbia, Vuk Gregorović, the grandson of Juraj Branković. After 30 days, Shabatz fell to the invaders, thus further securing the hinterland surrounding Belgrade from additional Ottoman incursions across the Danube. In the weeks following the siege, Hungarian raids into Turkish-controlled Bosnia and Serbia commenced. This included the looting of many towns by none other than a newly released Vlad Dracula. As he had done over a decade ago, the former Wallachian voivode impaled and massacred soldiers and civilians alike during yet another campaign of terror. In retaliation for the fall of Shabatz, the Ottoman marcher lords of Serbia resumed their destructive raids into Hungary throughout the summer of 1476, overrunning the Banat of Temeshvar. However, the force was to be defeated at the town of Bela Crkva during their journey back to friendly territory. Further raids into Croatia and Slovenia were also initiated, with the sacking of towns such as Grk, Vipada, Postojna and Ljubljana. By the end of the year, Ottoman raids had extended as far as Tavisio, Arnoldstein and Villach, as peasant revolts erupted in the broader region. The situation was so dire that King Matthias's bride, Princess Beatrice of Naples, had to navigate her way into her future husband's plundered kingdom through charred villages and fields of corpses, while desperately trying to avoid Turkish raiders. In the twilight years of his reign, Mehmed II began focusing on consolidating his power in the outer regions of his empire. After years of fighting on multiple fronts within his realm, the Sultan sought to stabilize his frontiers, while formulating new plans to expand westward toward the heart of Europe. The first region we will examine is the Black Sea, which the Sultan aimed to transform into an Ottoman lake. Nonetheless, many powers perched on the Black Sea coast would challenge these ambitions, including the principalities of Moldavia and Theodoro, along with the Genoese colonies of Kaffa, Kerch and Tana, and the Crimean Khanate. To fully understand the political situation, we must first turn back the clock. The Golden Horde was one of the major successor states of the Mongol Empire, emerging in the mid-13th century under the leadership of Batu Khan, a grandson of the great Genghis Khan. The Khanate dominated an expansive territory that stretched from the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube River in the west to the edges of Siberia in the east. Feared by various foes, the Golden Horde famously raided Eastern Europe for centuries, often extracting tribute to support its war machine, particularly from the minor Russian principalities to its north. In addition to being a significant military power, the Khanate played a prominent role in the Eurasian trade network. Situated at a crossroads between east and west, the state facilitated commerce along the Silk Road by providing protection to caravans and maintaining a stable system of weights and coinage. Cities like Sarai became bustling trade hubs, where goods from China, the Middle East, India, and Western Europe exchanged hands. This prosperity contributed to the cosmopolitan nature of the nomadic Khanate, attracting merchants, scholars, and artisans from diverse cultural backgrounds. By the early 14th century, the Golden Horde had abandoned its ancestral religion of Tengriism in favor of Islam under its ruler Uzbek Khan. linking the state to the broader Islamic world. However, following Uzbek's death, the state experienced dynastic instability and a rise in independence movements among its local governors and generals. With the authority of the Ulugh Khan compromised, the Golden Horde faced a series of significant military defeats against its northern neighbors by the second half of the century. Although the military and diplomatic situation somewhat stabilized during the reign of Toktamish Khan in the 1380s.
Yeah, so freaking Timur, bro. Timur went out and just like crippled these guys to a way that I don't think they ever fully recovered.
Timur's invasion of the Khanate in the 1390s shattered any real chance for the state's recovery. Fragmenting like the Mongol Empire, the Golden Horde, now referred to as the Great Horde, was reduced to just the core lands surrounding its central capital of Sarai, also known as the Ulugh Yurd. In the early 1440s, a warlord named Haji I Giray established a newly independent Tatar-led state in the fertile peninsula of Crimea and claimed the contested title of Ulugh Khan. Tracing their lineage back to the great Genghis Khan's grandson, Tugay Timur, the Giray family aimed to reclaim the entirety of the former territories of the Golden Horde. In this quest for legitimacy, they confronted the Great Horde, and later the Khanate of Kazan further north. During the ensuing wars, the Giray family allied with the Grand Duke of Muscovy, while the Joji family partnered with Lithuania. Yet this balance between the two sides shifted with Mehmed II's conquest of Constantinople in 1453, which expanded his realm's influence over the Black Sea. Aligning himself with the growing power of the Sublime Porte, Haji I supported its military campaigns against the Genoese over the next 2 decades.
Okay. Well, Haji Khan was the elder of the 3 sons. He carries Genghis's blood. Thus, the Khanate belongs to him and his line.
With the death of Haji in 1466, a civil war erupted in the Crimean Khanate between the 2 sons of the former ruler, Nur Devlet and Mienli. In their struggle for the throne, the elder Nur allied himself with Muscovy and the Great Horde, while the younger Mienli sought military assistance from the Tatar elites of the Crimean Peninsula and the Ottomans. After 2 years of conflict, Mienli had secured the throne, while his defeated brother was imprisoned in the Genoese fortress of Sudak. Although the Khanate appeared united once more, it faced another wave of instability in 1475. For many years, local Tatar governors, known as Tuduns, had been granted authority to govern the Muslim population of Kaffa and its surrounding lands by the Crimean Khan and the local Genoese consul of the city. However, after a dispute over filling the vacant office between the Khan and the Genoese, the Tatar elites of the Crimean Peninsula sought Ottoman intervention to resolve the issue. Among these elites was the influential Eminek of the Shirin clan, who by the beginning of the year had driven Mengle Garai from his capital of Kirkyur, forcing the Khan to flee to the safety of the Genoese at Kaffa.
Rebelled. Retaliation for being denied the promised Oh.
Seeing an opportunity to expand his influence across the broader Black Sea region and restore order in Crimea, Mehmed II eagerly accepted the invitation and ordered Gedik Ahmed Pasha to set sail for the region in the spring of 1475.
Yeah, that's the thing with the Ottomans. Another trend, like I think it was with some of the early ones, oftentimes the Ottomans really did capitalize on the dysfunction of several, places and states, and would often show up, help, but obviously more to help themselves. And again, it gives them great pretext to do what they've already kind of wanted to do. So the Ottomans are opportunistic in that sense, and I think very intelligent for that.
The Ottoman Grand Vizier led a large navy to Kaffa and besieged the Genoese settlement. Kaffa could only resist the invaders for 4 days, as the intense Ottoman bombardment proved too much for its defenders to withstand. With the Genoese consul executed and Mienli captured, Ahmed Pasha turned his attention to the remaining fortresses that were still resisting in the region. Like Kaffa, the fortress of Sudak fell to Turkish forces after a brief siege, which also led to the capture of Nur Devlet. The fall of these settlements was followed by the annexation of Kerch and Tana later in the year, thus ending the Genoese presence in the Black Sea.
Dang.
The notable fortress of Theodoro, located in the interior countryside under local Greek rule, was also besieged to eradicate the last vestiges of Christian power in Crimea. The Principality of Theodoro, also known as Gothia, was a small Christian state that traced its origins to the Empire of Trebizond, making it
The pretext for the Ottoman siege was a coup d'etat backed by Stefan of Moldavia, in which the pro-Ottoman prince was executed by his brother.
the last remnant of Eastern Roman civilization. Economically, Theodoro was deeply involved in regional trade. Although it lacked a significant port of its own, it maintained overland routes connecting to Genoese-controlled ports, such as Kaffa and Sadak. These trade connections helped Theodoro remain economically viable, despite its political vulnerability. Influenced by Greek, Gothic, and local Crimean cultures, the Gabras family governed from their capital at Theodoro and maintained autonomy through close diplomatic relations with their more powerful neighbours. With Ottoman armies now at his gates, Prince Alexander Gabras prepared his capital for a brutal siege. Theodoro was ideally suited for defense, as it sat atop a steep limestone plateau, more than 1,000 feet above the surrounding plains.
It is a high castle on the nose of a rock that has stretched its head towards the heavens. Around this rock, on all four sides, are valleys like the pits of hell. Very formidable, it seems.
And was fortified with massive stone walls, towers, and natural cliffs that made a direct assault exceedingly difficult. It had successfully resisted attacks from the Tartars and Genoese in the past, and the defenders likely believed they could withstand another onslaught. However, Ahmed Pasha brought artillery and siege engineers with him, many of whom had been present in Constantinople during the 1453 siege. Even with this development, as well as limited supplies and foreign support, Alexander was able to hold out longer than even Constantine XI himself. For over 3 months, Turkish guns bombarded the capital, but were unable to penetrate the limestone plateau. Despite their courage and determination, the exhausted defenders of Theodoro were vastly outnumbered, and morale dwindled as food and water supplies ran low. By December 1475, the Ottomans had captured the city, either by breaching its defences or through a false retreat and ambush. Theodoro fell, and with it, the last vestige of Eastern Rome.
Wow. So that's how it goes on. Like I said, the Empire's dead already, but these little pockets of its corpse are just kind of around. And the Ottomans were very thorough in just eradicating Rome completely.
With Christian power in Crimea coming to an end, Mehmed reinstated Nerdevlet, but within a year of his return, his realm was invaded by the Great Horde. Although the invasion was repelled, the Crimean elites wrote to Sultan Mehmed requesting his deposition and the reinstatement of Mienli to the Crimean throne. By 1478, Mienli was released from captivity and regained the throne, but this time as an official vassal of the Sublime Porte. With Nerdevlet fleeing to Muscovy, the Crimean Khanate was once again united under a single Khan, who now ruled as the Ottoman Sultan's appointee. In a single military campaign, Mehmed's northern border was secured from enemies, as Moldavia.
Yeah, good on him, dude. Very great move. I'm loving the political maneuvering and just using. Mehmed does seem to have these guys in the back of his pocket. Like what he did with Wallachia having Radu. Just leaving Radu there and then immediately taking Vlad out of as a threat was a genius move. And having, here this guy for Crimea was another great move. So definitely kind of sort of a kingmaker in his own way, which Mehmed seems to play at times. And having the Black Sea almost all to himself, like, again, it's very impressive.
Moldavia was also compelled to make peace with Constantinople by becoming a tributary to the House of Osman in 1480. Consolidating his power to the north, Mehmed II turned his attention to the wars with Venice and Albania to the west. Consequently, Turkish raiders once again penetrated deep into Europe. In 1476, the Venetian territory of Istria was set ablaze, and its population was taken into slavery. The following year, Omar Bey's raiders advanced into Venetian-held Friuli, where they defeated a local force near the Isonzo River and captured dozens of its officers. In the aftermath of the battle, the lands between the Piave and Isonzo rivers were pillaged and burned, with flames visible from the top of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. Muslim forces possibly have never ventured so deep into the lands of Christendom, which sparked panic all across Europe. In 1478, another raid into the wider region was carried out, this time by Mihalolu Ali Bey and Malkacholu Bali Bey. The two Ottoman marcher lords continued the successes of the previous year by sacking the towns of Baveg, Tolmino, Kobarid, Versine and Valak. While his marcher lords were active deep inside Europe, Mehmed II began preparing for yet another military campaign, this time targeting Albania and its Venetian-held towns. The primary objective was the town of Shkodra, which had been besieged in 1474, along with the Albanian capital of Kruja. By 1478, the once formidable armies of the League of Leisure had dissolved due to a lack of unity under Albanian leadership. Additionally, Kruja had also been virtually surrendered to the Doge. Already blockaded for over a year by local Ottoman forces, the starving garrison of the fortress capitulated when the Sultan's 30,000-strong army appeared beneath its walls during the summer.
Yeah, and it's been the Ottomans have tried taking that capital forever, and now they finally did it. Again, Mehmed's unstoppable now.
With the anticlimactic surrender of the capital of Kruja came the conclusion of the formal Albanian revolt, which had initially ignited almost a quarter of a century earlier in the very streets where Mehmed now paraded his army.
Yeah, you have to give it to the Albanians. They held on for quite a long time. That was probably some of the best resistance I've seen against the Ottomans. But, unfortunately, it wasn't meant to last. You know, it definitely felt like after Skanderbeg, it did feel like the writing was on the wall, you get me? Not having that unity. And even on his deathbed, those were his final words we covered in a video or two ago. Or Skanderbeg says you need to be united in order to make sure your kingdoms are eternal. Yeah. So once again, they lost it all, so... Still though, I think they may have put up some of the best resistance against the Ottomans.
The bleeding ulcer that had drained the armies of the Sublime Porte had finally been vanquished. With Islamic banners now flying over Kruja, Mehmed's forces marched towards Shkodra, which was already under siege by Rumelian Beylerbey David Pasha. However, unlike the former Albanian capital, the Venetian stronghold proved to be a greater challenge for the Sultan. For many months, the defenders held out against a barrage of artillery.
Okay. According to the chronicles, the Ottoman besiegers of that place were shouting to Rome, as it was considered a key staging point for an invasion of Italy, which... yeah.
Reinforcements from Anatolia were also unable to alter the course of the bloody and prolonged siege. As winter approached, Mehmed and his main forces retreated, while Evrenisolu Ahmed Bey remained with a token force of 10,000. Exhausted after years of war with the Sublime Porte and with Shkodra on the brink of surrender, Venice was determined to end the disastrous conflict at any cost. At the end of 1478, Giovanni Dario, the secretary of the Doge's Senate, was granted unlimited powers to negotiate peace with Mehmed and accept all the demands of the Grand Turk. The terms outlined in the Treaty of Constantinople would prove disastrous for Venice. The Doge was to cede Shkodra, the island of Lemnos, and the mountainous region of Minor to the port. Moreover, Venice was to relinquish all claims to Kruja and Negroponte. All territories acquired by Venice during 16 years of warfare were to be returned, while Mehmed, in turn, was to restore all towns and territories he had occupied in the Morea, Albania, and Dalmatia. Lastly, Venice was to pay a grand installment of 150,000 golden ducats over the subsequent 2 years, with an additional 10,000 ducats as the new annual tribute for securing trading rights within Ottoman territory. With Venice securing an expensive peace for itself, the last remnants of resistance in the Balkans against the Ottomans were left to their own devices.
Dang, that's yeah, the Balkans are basically under the Ottomans now fully. Now that the Albanian revolt is for the most part kind of crippled and just done, and now that Venice is throwing in the towel, basically the Balkans are now the Ottomans. Wow. Yeah, that peace treaty was brutal. But I guess Venice needs what it can. They were kind of getting thrashed there, so. But yeah, just showing. I'm impressed just by how the Ottomans are just so. Their rise has been one of the best, the quickest and most strongest rises, and we've seen. And then kind of like knowing what happens to them later, becoming the old sick man of Europe. I mean that's the fate of every empire, to be strong and then to become weak. But like it is very jarring when we've seen the future Ottomans and seeing them in their kind of their rising glory as of right now. Just it is almost kind of tragic actually to see an empire so strong become weak. But well, that's the fate of every empire.
The remote lands of the Despotate of Epirus, under the rule of Leonardo III Tocco, had been stripped away by the armies of the Sultan. In 1449, the capital of Arta fell, followed by Anglo-Castron in 1460 to Turkish raiders. The Ottoman-Venetian War of the next 2 decades had been an opportunity for Leonardo to regain these lost lands, and so he decided to align himself with the Doge. Nevertheless, with the end of the war, Epirus now lay open to an easy conquest, as Mehmed wished to use its domains for his future plans against Western Europe. In 1479, Gedik Ahmed Pasha invaded the Despotate at the head of a large fleet and captured its capital of Vonitsa, along with the islands of Lefkada, Cephalonia, and Zakynthos. As a result of the sudden Turkish invasion, Leonardo and his officials fled to Taranto, thus officially putting an end to the Despotate.
Yeah, Epirus got wrecked there. Again, now that the Ottomans are having much less resistance, you're just seeing them like make quick work of everyone. They're literally like, like playing it much more easier as everyone's just kind of throwing in the towel of fighting them. They're like, yeah, these guys are too much,
With all of Albania now under his direct control and peace with Venice secured, Mehmed II began preparations for a new offensive aimed at Western Europe. Nonetheless, before he could proceed, the Sultan had to confront one last front against a foe he had yet to defeat, the Kingdom of Hungary. By the summer of 1479, Ottoman raiders had resumed their attacks and pillaging of King Matthias Corvinus's lands. In swift and brutal assaults, the towns of Nedelice and Lutemer were set ablaze, along with the fields and villages along the Drava River. Despite the devastation, these incursions were merely the beginning of a significant Ottoman offensive into the region, as in the town of Smederevo, a grand Turkish force was being assembled. With a total strength of approximately 15 to 25,000 men, the army, led by Mihalolu Ali Bey, crossed the Danube.
Okay, to give Seljuk in the marches to Lugu was and forbid him from raiding is like giving Galata to me and telling me not to drink one.
From Vidin, where they were joined by 2,000 allied Wallachians led by Basarab IV. The Wallachian voivode had usurped his cousin, Basarab III, 2 years prior, with the help of Stefan of Moldavia, but had since then knelt to Ottoman vassalage. After the two armies merged, Ali Bey set his sights on the lands of Transylvania, with the objective of seizing the rich deposits of gold, silver and salt in the local region. However, the main Ottoman objective of the campaign was to consolidate their influence south of the Carpathians, thereby preventing Hungarian intervention in Wallachian politics, as had been done after the Battle of Valea Alba 3 years prior. By the fall of 1479, the Ottoman army was on the move. As they plundered their way to the town of Oreshti, Ali's men filled their wagons with abundant spoils and captives. However, as he was preparing to start his return march to Wallachia, the Ottoman marcher lord heard news of an incoming enemy host, and so prepared to make a stand at the town of Shibot. By October 13th, Voivode Stefan Batory of Transylvania, leading a host of 25 to 30,000, composed of Hungarians, Romanians, Transylvanians and Serbs, arrived at the gates of the Turkish camp, situated on the plain of Breadfield near Shibot. Seeing the foe across the plain, Ali Bey marched out with the army and began preparing for battle.
Dang.
The Battle of Breadfield had just begun.
Alright, I'm kinda hyped though. This seems like this is gonna be an epic battle.
The Ottoman army was predominantly composed of light Akinjer cavalry, accompanied by their Wallachian allies, led by Basarab IV in the rear. The center was commanded by Hasanolu Isa Bey, the left by Makacholu Bali Bey, and the right by the leader of the entire army, Mihalolu Ali Bey. On the Hungarian side, Voivode Batory commanded from the center of his army, which consisted of his retinue of 8,000 Transylvanian infantry and cavalry, as well as a small contingent of Wallachians, led by the deposed and revenge-seeking Basarab III. On the left flank were stationed 10,000 Hungarians, led by Paul Knizi, who was accompanied by Szekely light infantry in the rearguard. On the right flank were stationed the Transylvanian Saxon troops, led by Georg Hecht, comprising 4,300 infantry and 700 light cavalry. Accompanying them were 900 light Serb cavalry, led by despot Vuk Grigorovic and Dimitar Jakšić.
I will say, though, off the bat, the Hungarian army is much more diverse and has a much more, I think in terms of like unit composition, much more impressive. Like they have light cavalry, heavy infantry, light infantry. Meanwhile, the Ottomans mainly just have the light cavalry. So definitely it seems like if there's anything I can give to the Hungarian forces, much more diverse and whatnot. I'm wondering if the Ottomans are going to have to really utilize like the speed and maneuverability of their light cavalry, which is the largest portion of their force. Maybe even we might see the return of the feigned retreat, which the Turks used for so much of its history. Who knows? But yeah, I'll say by terms of composition, the Hungarians are really impressive, but you know, we'll see if the Ottomans can pull up a trick or two off their sleeve.
After a series of inspiring speeches from the leaders of both armies, the battle began when Hecht charged into the Ottoman left. However, after much bloody melee and taking heavy casualties, the Saxons and their Serbian and Romanian allies were forced to retreat, as Balybey's horse riders proved too great a challenge to overcome.
Oh dang.
Meanwhile, another bloody melee between Batory and the Ottoman centre of Isa Bey took place. But during the heavy fighting, the voivode's horse was killed under him, thus severely wounding his thigh.
Ooh.
With their commander taken out of action and the Turks breaching their lines, it seemed like all was lost. Despite the circumstances, Batory returned to the battlefield, an action later celebrated by European chroniclers.
Oh wow.
He began making desperate efforts to counterattack and push back the Ottoman advances on his centre and right. A long melee continued, as many from both sides fell on the plain of Bredfield, where the sounds of swords and screams echoed throughout the battlefield. It was
yeah, this seems like the lines have stabilized. Like at first the Ottomans pushed, but then, which I was surprised. I thought that, like the heavier cavalry and infantry would push the Ottomans back, but no, I was mistaken. Apparently, the Ottomans are just fighting that fiercely, so that's pretty cool. But the lines have seemed to stabilize, and with the return of the commander, things seem to now just be degraded into a slog kind of fight. I have to say, that's really cool that he came back. Usually when people get injured, that's the end of them in these battles. This is like one of the few times where an injured commander just comes back. It seldomly happens from all the videos I've seen on this channel, so that is pretty impressive.
During this critical counterattack that Isa Bey was knocked off his horse and killed, causing a great panic in the Turkish army, resulting in their rout. Now the army of Ali Bey watched in confusion and horror as they too began retreating down south, seeing that the day was lost. With the Ottoman right now withdrawn from the battle, Paul Knizi's Hungarians and Szekely infantry surged forward and began circling around the now collapsing Ottoman centre. Many Akinjis were killed in this charge, which saw the Turkish camp plundered and captured slaves freed.
Oh my goodness. Dang, man, that was it definitely was. I think it did come down to the commanders, like when you know, when one was injured, morale almost broke, but he came back, and then when the Ottoman commander died, the morale broke. So it seemed like yeah, the fate was between whose morale's gonna break first. But yeah, that was the Ottomans definitely put up a much more fierce, straight up fight than I expected. But either way, like, a really cool battle.
5 grueling hours of combat, the Battle of Bredfield came to a bloody close. While Batory's army had lost well over 3,000 men during the battle, around half of the Turkish host lay dead, wounded, or captured alongside their plunder.
Dang.
Like Hunyadi's famous defense of Belgrade back in 1456, the victory at Bredfield was celebrated throughout Hungary and wider Europe, and it marked a rare occasion in which the Ottoman army was defeated in battle. However, while the remnants of Ali Bey's shattered army regrouped in Wallachia, new pressing matters had emerged back in the Ottoman capital. Bredfield was a significant setback to Turkish expansion in the Balkans, but Mehmed's true ambitions lay across the Adriatic in Italy. Since the famous conquest of Constantinople, the Sultan had always eyed the lands where the Roman state was born. According to him, the new red apple was ready to...
The red apple is a Turkish symbol representing the ultimate ideal. Most commonly, it symbolized Constantinople and later Rome.
be plucked, just as the old red apple had been back in 1453.
Alright, so... Actually, we're gonna end the series tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the final part, which means this entire series was about 8 episodes long. Really cool. So, guys, we're gonna see how Mehmed's his final in the twilight of his career, what he accomplishes before he kicks the bucket. So yeah, I guess we'll wrap this up tomorrow. Hey, I'll see you then, guys. Bye, everyone.